All right, everyone, let's get started. Again, if you're just jumping on, sorry for the technical difficulties. They were coming from our end. For whatever reason, our filming device didn't want to shoot right away, and that got us all fouled up as far as the event was concerned. So thank you all for joining us on the news stream. Hopefully you'll enjoy tonight's talk. So welcome to Fireside Chats with Dave, Chapter 4. And it is the fourth installment in our talks on the history of golf in Western Pennsylvania. Once again, my name is Dave Moore. I'm the museum manager from the McKeesport Regional History and Heritage Center. And tonight's topic, when it comes to the history of golf in Western Pennsylvania, is none other than the United States Amateur Championship. And the U.S. Amateur is the oldest golf tournament in America, dating back to 1895. And to date, Western Pennsylvania has played host to 5 of these national championships. And all 5 of them have been hosted by Oakmont Country Club. So it's going to be another Oakmont heavy episode tonight as we discuss the history of the U.S. Amateur in our area. So I'm going to jump right into it. We have 5 of them to talk about. And the first 2 are very significant in the history of golf overall, so I certainly want to give them a little bit more time than the more recent ones of the last 50 or 60 years or so. So let's start with the very first U.S. Amateur Championship held in Western Pennsylvania, and that was in 1919. Over a century ago, the first national championship Western Pennsylvania hosted was the 1919 U.S. Amateur at Oakmont Country Club. And the field included quite a few heavyweights. And for those that are not as well versed in the history of golf as I am, and as some of you may be, the U.S. Amateur was the most prestigious American golf event for the first half of the 20th century. And especially in those early days of golf in America, it was more respected to remain an amateur than to turn professional. So the amateur held very high esteem in the minds of many across our nation and across the world in the first half of the 20th century. And it was considered to be the more major tournament that the USGA put on, even more important than the US Open. And of course, that has flip-flopped over the last 50 or 60 years or so. So when you look at the field for the 1919 U.S. Amateur, we're talking about a who's who of American golfers dating back to the first half of the 20th century. The field included the likes of Francis Ouimet, which if any of you have ever seen the movie The Greatest Game Ever Played, he is the young caddy that defeated Ted Ray and Harry Vardon on his home course of the Country Club up in Brookline, Massachusetts to win the 1913 U.S. Open. And he would go on to win the U.S. Amateur in 1914. The field also included Chick Evans of Chicago, who was the 1916 U.S. Open and U.S. Amateur champion, and W.C. Phones Jr., William Clark Phones Jr., and he was not only the 1910 U.S. Amateur champion, but he was also the son of Oakmont's founder, Henry C. Phones. And we'll go into more depth on W.C. Phones in later editions of my Fireside Chats, specifically when we talk about key figures in Western Pennsylvania golf, not named Palmer or Semple. And finally, the final big name that was in the field of the 1919 U.S. Amateur was none other than a 17-year-old wonder kid from Atlanta, Georgia, and his name was Bobby Jones, who, of course, would go on to be arguably the greatest amateur golfer in the history of the game. Now, with a field with such pedigree as Jones and Ouimet and Evans, the winner actually was a relative unknown to those outside of Western Pennsylvania. And the winner was none other than S. Davidson Heron, who went by Davey to the locals. Now, Davey Heron was a member at Oakmont. He grew up on the links of Oakmont Country Club, and he, of course, was a Pittsburgh native. He played collegiately at Princeton University and was the captain of Princeton's golf team when he graduated in 1918. After he graduated, he served in the First World War, and then he got a job working in the steel mills in the area and kept up his play in local tournaments and qualified for the 1919 U.S. Amateur on his home course of Oakmont. And he played very well, making it all the way to the finals, where he would face none other than Bobby Jones. Jones, at the time, was a 17-year-old prodigy and probably was the favorite in that final before Davey Heron defeated the young Georgia native to win his first and only national championship. Jones would lose to Heron 5-3 over 36 holes, and Davey Heron would go on to win 2 Pennsylvania State Amateur Championships in his career before passing away at a relatively young age in the 1950s. You fast forward 6 years to the 1925 U.S. Amateur, and this is one of the biggest events ever held at Oakmont Country Club, especially and arguably the most important U.S. Amateur, because this time Bobby Jones got his redemption and took home the Havemeyer Trophy as the U.S. Amateur champion. Jones, of course, lost to Heron in the finals and didn't win his first national championship until he won the 1923 U.S. Open. He would win his first amateur in 1924 and then defend the title in 1925 at Oakmont. And the tail of the tape came down to Jones and another Georgia native by the name of Watts Gunn. Now, Watts was Bobby's best friend. He was his college roommate at Georgia Tech, and he was a fellow member of East Lake Golf Club, which hosts the annual tour championship on the PGA Tour. Now, when it comes to Gunn's participation in the 1925 U.S. Amateur, Bobby knew the talent that Watts had and convinced his father, who was a judge in Atlanta, to allow Watts to accompany Bobby for the trip up to Oakmont to compete in the 1919 1925 U.S. Amateur. And Judge Gunn said, "Bobby, as long as you're watching my boy, he can go and participate in the tournament." So even though Bobby was roughly the same age as Watts, he was his chaperone for his trip north. And as the story goes, Watts Gunn, of course, played very well, cruised to the finals, as did Bobby Jones. And it is the first and only time members of the same club faced off in the finals of the U.S. Amateur Championship. And the night before the final match, Watts Gunn came down into the clubhouse where both Jones and Gunn were staying for the week, all decked out in a fine tuxedo. And Bobby saw him over while he was enjoying a cup of coffee and asked Watts, "Where do you think you're going?" And Watts replied, "Well, I have a pretty date with a Pittsburgh girl tonight, Bobby. If you don't mind, I don't want to be late." And Bobby replied to his young friend, "Oh, no, I want you at your best tomorrow. You're not going on no date. Get back upstairs and get a good night's sleep." So Watts Gunn stood up that poor Pittsburgh girl to get a good night's sleep to face Bobby Jones in the finals of the 1925 U.S. Amateur. And when they got to the first tee box, Watts made a rather quick remark to the fans and the press in attendance saying, "Well, Bob, are you going to give me that one shot aside like you do down at East Lake?" And Bobby Jones giggled and then turned very serious and turned to Watts and said, "Boy, the only thing you're going to get from me today is hell." And that's exactly what Bobby Jones inflicted upon his young friend as he defeated him soundly to win the 1925 U.S. Amateur Championship. Now, a fun side story to that, Watts Gunn did return to Pittsburgh and ended up marrying that girl that he stood up for that blind date the night before the U.S. Amateur Championship final, and Bobby Jones served as Watts' best man for the event. So Jones wins his third career major championship at that point. He would go on to win 13 before retiring at the very young age of 28 years old. And as somebody that's getting ready to turn 30 this year, I very much wish I could retire just like Bobby Jones. Going ahead to the 1938 U.S. Amateur, that's the next time that it came to our area, and once again hosted at Oakmont Country Club. The winner was a young man named Willie Nessa, and he was a New York native and one of 7 golfing sons of Vitaly and Anna Nessa. Now, Willie's 6 older brothers all became PGA professionals, accomplished players in their own right. His one brother won the 1952 PGA Championship. His other brother actually lost to Ben Hogan in the 1948 PGA Championship. But it was at his brother's request that Willie remained a lifelong amateur. And the deal was, as long as he didn't turn pro, his brothers would pay for his college tuition. So at the height of the Great Depression, this was quite the offer for Willie. So he took them up on it. He remained a lifelong amateur and got a wonderful education from Holy Cross College at the time. Now, if Anna Ternessa, Willie's mother, had it her way, her youngest son would have went into the priesthood. But as it turned out, Willie did not become a professional golfer or a priest. But he would win the 1938 U.S. Amateur Championship at Oakmont Country Club, defeating a movie extra from Hollywood by the name of B. Patrick Abbott in the final. Now, Ternessa, a very accomplished player, he would go on to win the 1948 U.S. Amateur, and he would also win the 1947 British Amateur Championship, as well as participate on 3 U.S. Walker Cup teams and captained one of those teams as well. In 1969, the U.S. Amateur returned to Western Pennsylvania and, as I mentioned, once again to Oakmont. And this time it came under a different format. The way the Amateur had been played up until 1965 and has been played every year since 1972 has been as a match play tournament where you face individuals to move on in a bracket, very similar to college basketball's March Madness, or theoretically any professional collegiate or professional playoff system. But for 8 years in the 1960s and into the 1970s, the USGA made the U.S. Amateur a stroke play event over 4 rounds, very similar to today's U.S. Open or the Masters or any other PGA Tour event. And this time, the tournament was won by an All-American from the University of Florida by the name of Steve Melnyk. Now, Melnyk shot a 2-over 285 over the course of 4 rounds at Oakmont, winning by 5 shots over a Marvin Vinnie Giles, who would finish runner-up 3 times in the Amateur and then win it a couple years later. Melnyk would also go on to win the 1971 British Amateur Championship, following in the footsteps of Willie Ternessa. And he would play on 2 Walker Cup teams before he turned professional. And for those of you that remember golf telecasts in the 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s, you'll recognize Steve Melnyk's voice from his work with CBS, ABC, and ESPN over those years. And then finally, the last U.S. Amateur that has been contested in our area to date is the 2003 U.S. Amateur Championship. And that year, it coincided with the centennial anniversary of Oakmont Country Club, which was founded in 1903. So the club celebrated with the U.S. Amateur that year. And the field for the 2003 U.S. Amateur had a lot of names that you might be familiar with if you're a golf fan of today. Among the participants in the event that year were U.S. Ryder Cuppers Brandt Snedeker, Ryan Moore, Bill Haas, and J.B. Holmes. And in the case of Snedeker and Haas, FedEx Cup champions in their own right. But the finals would come down to an American by the name of Casey Wittenberg, who was supposed to be the next big thing in American golf, and an Australian journeyman by the name of Nick Flanagan. Wittenberg, as I mentioned, was a prodigy. He was expected to be the next big name in American golf, and he never really panned out as a professional, but he did make it to the finals of the 03 Amateur to face Flanagan. Now, when it came to Nick Flanagan, he came from a very blue-collar family back in Australia. His father worked in the mines, and his mother worked at a grocery store. And they had to work a lot of overtime hours to send Nick to the States, where he basically barnstormed across the country, landing in California and making a cross-country trip with a couple of his buddies in a car sleeping in motels and eating fast food en route to participating in the amateur that year. And he went home with the trophy. So quite the story and the journey for Mr. Flanagan. He was the first non-American winner of the U.S. Amateur since 1971, when Canadian Gary Cohen won the championship. And as I mentioned, he defeated Casey Wittenberg in 37 holes to win. Now, Flanagan, very much like Wittenberg, did not have the professional career of some of these other players that participated in the 03 Amateur, but he actually returned in 2016 to Oakmont as a caddy for a fellow Australian in the 2016 U.S. Amateur. And looking ahead, very exciting that the 2021 U.S. Amateur Championship will be returning to Western Pennsylvania, and it will be held once again at Oakmont Country Club. So it's certainly an event I encourage everybody to go and check out. You'll get to see a lot of young, up-and-coming collegiate golfers, high schoolers, and future stars on the PGA Tour, and you never know, maybe a future major champion. So I certainly encourage everybody to look into that next year and see if you can go out and visit Oakmont on one of those tournament days. So that is it as far as this week's Fireside Chat is concerned. We talked about the U.S. Amateur this week. If you have missed any of the 3 previous Fireside Chats with myself, they are on our Facebook page, and you can also find them on our brand new YouTube channel. And they are also on our website. I encourage you all to visit McKeesportheritage.org. We have a lot of great things up on the website. You can learn a little bit more about us. You can watch these videos. And there's different ways to get involved with the center, whether it's through volunteering or donations. So we certainly encourage you to take a look at the website and our social media platforms, both Facebook and Instagram. And we also encourage you to partake in the Curators Book Club and interact with us on social media. We're pretty good about that, especially in these quarantine times. We're doing our best to keep up with the messages and the comments, and we appreciate everybody who has taken the time to go through our different posts and in our different videos and leaving such wonderful comments. We very much appreciate it. Next week, I will return for yet another edition of Golf in Western Pennsylvania, and I'm very excited to say that next week we will be covering the king himself, the pride of Western Pennsylvania, Mr. Arnold Palmer. So make sure you tune in next week. We'll be back at our regular time of 7 p.m. I appreciate everybody coming on an hour later, and we apologize for the technical difficulties on our part. Hopefully we won't have those issues going forward. And thank you all very much. Make sure you keep practicing social distancing, wash your hands, stay well, stay safe. We can't wait to see you guys back at the center. Hopefully it's going to be sooner rather than later. And we wish you all a very good night, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you.